Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining this episode of Apparel with Purpose. I am your host, Matt Fogarty, the founder and president of Willow Apparel, a nonprofit that exists to highlight wonderful organizations that are working in the nonprofit space, help them with apparel, and provide fundraising tool, and also to help with marketing and getting their message spread in the community through wearable advocacy. Today, I am really excited to have a wonderful partner of Willow Apparel and a wonderful guest in Mikayla Cluxton joining the show. She is going to be talking a little bit about her work, and I'd love to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, yes, I'm so glad to be here and be able to talk with everyone. It's funny because usually I'm the one interviewing people with our podcast, and so it's nice to kind of be on the opposite side of it. But I am from South Carolina, is where I grew up. I did spend some time out west as well in Utah, where I went to school for BYU, which is kind of where I got the initial idea for this. But right now I spend a lot of my time working on the podcast, trying to bring voice to caregivers, and also working on my marketing agency as well too. So kind of dabbling in a little bit of everything. But I'm always super passionate about, kind of similar to you, giving voice to people that don't have that voice and really trying to shed light on some of the invisible work that I think a lot of us don't notice on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and that's, some of the synergies that we found and, kind of how we got connected together. Shout out to Shauna. I know she's amazing, and I believe was the one who originally introduced us. So really excited to be able to have you here on this platform and learn a little bit more about your work. And certainly, as you know, I'm very passionate about trying to empower people that are just not always looked at in the right light, or maybe not given enough time to. I feel like caregivers, very similar to people experiencing homelessness, they can kind of be taken for granted and not really understood to the extent that we should. So I'd love to start off by just giving you the opportunity to kind of explain a little bit about why the Care Collective exists and, why it's so important to you to giving voice to caregivers.
Yeah, so this comes from a really personal space, which I find that most caregivers or people that work in care, they tend to have really personal stories. And for me, I spent time growing up with my dad working in nursing homes. He's a nurse practitioner, and so he would go and service these nursing homes. And when I would talk to his employees or talk to him coming out of COVID, they would just talk about how lonely all of the elderly people were and how sad they were, how nobody was visiting them. And so when I was at college at the time, I started doing some research and found that there was a professor at our university in particular that was doing some research and found that loneliness is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and it can take off as much as 15 years of your life. And
Wow.
there was a study that said that a majority of elderly people that move into a nursing home, a lot of them, I think it was well over half, are going to die within a year of moving into that nursing home. And they were like, is it because of age? Is it because of they're just sick when they go into this nursing home? And after controlling for these various things, they found that at its core, it was that loneliness and the fact that they weren't getting interaction. And so I spent a lot of time looking at that space, trying to see, okay, what's the solution? How do we help this? So I spent some time in nursing homes. I can still recount lots of my own personal stories from taking care of people. But on the flip side, as I started getting involved in working in home with people and providing care, I started to notice that really where this issue lies, at least in my opinion, everybody has their own perspective, is that caregivers are not getting the support that they need to be able to fully show up and be there for their person, right? And so, talking to the family members, talking to other caregivers, there just seemed to be that epidemic of loneliness kind of started with those caregivers and the burdens that they were facing. And so I kind of needed to pivot a little bit in a way and be able to give voice to their stories, because what I also saw there was that there was a lot of people that didn't even feel comfortable sharing their stories, that didn't even feel like they could give voice to it because there's a lot of shame and stigma that can come with being a caregiver. And so anyways, as it kind of developed, as I was talking to people, I realized, there needs to be a space for people to just share their stories, because I really do believe that there's something therapeutic in being able to share your story, be able to name these feelings that you're having. And there's power in community to be able to share these experiences collectively so that hopefully we can make changes that are a little bit more permanent, whether it looks like how we encounter this in a workspace, whether it's, some legislation that definitely needs to be passed to be able to greater support these people. But I think that the power comes from first starting those conversations, right? And to highlighting it and giving voice and – and letting people have that space to be able to share in these human emotions together.
Yeah, I think that really has a lot of synergy with the work that we do here at Cherry Willow Apparel. Obviously, focused on a different group of individuals, but you spoke on a couple of different things, emphasizing community. I think that is something that, again, people experiencing homelessness, they often feel,
Mhm.
and that loneliness aspect is certainly one of the contributing factors to why people experiencing homelessness die on average 20 to 30 years younger
Right.
than somebody that's not experiencing homelessness. And again, you used another word, stigma, right? It can be really challenging
Mhm.
for people if you don't have a safe space to show up authentically and to share your story. So
Mhm.
props to you for creating that space and recognizing a need for the caregivers out there based on your experience. And that's one of the things that's been really fun for me. As the more people that are in this space, the more nonprofits that I've worked with, so many of them have that personal connection that really ties it into the mission, and oftentimes have overcome really challenging circumstances. Providing care for someone is a really huge burden, and can be, especially if you're not taking care of yourself. And I feel
Right.
like that's something that a lot of people don't often acknowledge, is just kind of the weight that being a caregiver can have. And then when providing care for others, how also do you make sure that you're providing care for yourself so that you can continue to show up with your best foot forward for others? Is there
Right.
anything in the work that you do, or that have you seen, caregivers who have been successful,
Mhm.
sustaining a long-term healthy relationship? How are they kind of able to do that and continue to show up for themselves in a positive way?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. It's something that I try to highlight with every single person that I talk to and that I interview on our podcast, because I really do feel like it's such like the main thing that I've learned in talking to people is that it is such an individual thing. Like, you need to figure out what your form of self-care is. There's no right or wrong answer to it. There was one woman I talked to that was like, I people probably think I'm crazy if they know what I do for self-care, and it usually involves driving on a back road and listening to loud rock music, and that's what I consider self-care. Like, getting my nails done, that's not going to do anything for me when my mom's yelling at me tomorrow, like,
Yeah.
that's not helpful. So I think that is the main thing that I have learned, is that it's very individual and it's very unique. And I think self-care as well too, you could look at it as like going to therapy, like having conversations, with your parents that you didn't think you were going to have. Like, for some people, they don't even realize and take the time to educate themselves on the financial aspects of caring for their parents, and realizing, okay, I'm going to have to get a power of attorney. I don't even know what my dad wants done with his funeral arrangements when he dies. Like, those are really hard conversations to have, especially when you're forced to grieve somebody sooner than you expected to. And so, even just taking the time to acknowledge, like, I'm proud of myself for starting to research this, because I've been putting this off because I didn't want to admit that I'm going to lose my parents. Like,
Yeah.
even taking baby steps like that to acknowledge what you're feeling, I think gets you a long way to the path that you're going on. Because again, that's kind of the other biggest thing that I've learned as well too, is that it's all just a journey. And the more you can have grace for yourself, which I think is the best form of self-care, the further you're going to get, in your whole caregiving journey. And the more that you can acknowledge too that whoever you're caring for, this is their first time experiencing life too. And so the more you can work together and be together on this journey, the better it's going to go for the both of you. I've heard some people have to have some very frank conversations. Some people that'll talk about their really terrible, heartbreaking relationships with their parents, that I don't know how that they do that, to go through that level of trauma and still show up for their parents every single day. And the amount of healing that it takes, and the amount of time it takes to say, I'm going to go exercise every morning. I'm going to make sure I go for a walk, and my husband's going to take care of, my mom for a second, and that's okay. I don't have to be there for everyone all the time doing everything. It just matters that you show up and that you heal yourself, too, as you're trying to help these other people, is the biggest thing that I would say.
Yeah, yeah, and that's certainly something that I feel like more people could be aware of. And I know one of the principles or concepts that you share often is that caregiving is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
From parenting to end of life, and myself as being a single dad, with three little ones, I have been a caretaker, from a very young age, and so I've had to learn and through some trials and tribulations, I wasn't always successful at it. Didn't always do the best job of taking care of myself, but I had to
Right.
learn to prioritize, my personal health and like my fitness, for example. That's something that became very important to me, and actually enabled me to become a better version of myself so that I could be a better dad and a better caregiver for my
Mhm.
kids. So I'd love for you to be able to share a little bit about, how you educate people on that caregiving journey, that it really
Mhm.
is everywhere, and then how they can, really find that support through those journeys.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, hearing your story and your experience too, that's part of what I want to highlight because I realized every single person I talked to has had such a unique experience. And I think that conversation point is super important, whether it's a woman I talked to that had to care for her mother that had cancer. And she was starting to care for her from, I think it was like the age of 20, at a level that she wasn't really expecting, right? Or whether it's somebody else that is caring for their parent, or whether it's been a parent that I talked to that is starting an organization to be able to help parents have more resources to help their autistic children. Like there's people on all sorts of different spectrums there, and I think that's the main point and the main conversation that I want to have with people is that you're going to be cared for at some point in your life. You probably already have been, if you're alive and talking and you're an adult, right? Like you had caregivers, whether it was teachers, parents, everything. And you're going to need that care through the end of your life. And so I think that more workplaces need to have this conversation. There's a story that I'll probably get into later, but just some glaring errors that I can see in our society that really need to be fixed if we're going to continue to support people as much as they need to be long term. So something that I've tried to focus on is I think just again starting this conversation, starting this awareness, because I've seen that as I talk to people, they leave it feeling more confident to say like, "Hey, I feel like I could go and talk to my employer about this now." Like I don't even tell my friends that I help take care of my grandma because half the time they want to say, "Well, why are you doing this? Just go put her in a nursing home." Things that you would think people should never say that. That sounds terrible, right?
Yeah.
But I think it starts with this conversation for people to see how it really affects people's lives and the support that they need. So that educational aspect. So, publishing these podcasts, getting out there on social media to have these conversations on Instagram, Facebook, all these different areas to be able to push this content out. And then we're actively working on building a community as well, too, to further provide resources because I've met so many amazing other creators, practitioners, just experts in so many little things that want to help people that are caregivers and have so much expertise to share. So I think being able to, again, create some kind of place for them to come to be able to receive this help long term, because there's a lot you have to navigate when you're a caregiver. That is just not common sense, for anybody when they're going through it for the first time.
Yeah, yeah, and I love especially how you said about supporting parents and kind of providing guidance for navigating being a caretaker while also working,
Yeah.
and being able to have those conversations with your employer. It's not always easy to be vulnerable in that situation, especially when maybe you need a little bit of flexibility or there's time commitment, with the caregiving obligation. And so kind of trying to balance showing up for family, which we know is incredibly important, but still being able to show up and take care of your financials and take care of your own independence. That can be a really big challenge. And I've
Mm.
certainly worked with a lot of people who have been caregivers. Again, as a single parent, having kids at 22,
Mm.
I saw right away, like, what I needed to do and had to change a lot and went through life
Yeah.
stages a lot differently than, most of my peers at that age. But, I'm very grateful for those experiences and for, being able to navigate those things. And so I love that, again, you're kind of sharing it, because it was like going through that, I didn't know how to share. I didn't have people that were going through
Right.
similar circumstances to me. So I didn't know, how to reach out to people. And it can be really challenging to ask for help.
Right. Well, and what I would say in response to that too is that, like, you understand this and you would know this, but as a parent, you're so focused on doing whatever it's going to take, for your kids, right? Like that's what you're so focused on. And so to me, those are going to make some of the best employees. Those are going to be some of the best
Yeah.
people to work with if they have the like if you're able to organize your kid's schedule and keep on top of your own, like you're probably going to be a great player. Not to say there's not going to be slip up occasionally, but everyone has their own slip ups, right? So not penalizing people just because their kid forgot their math homework. Sorry, I got to run home really quick. Whatever it is. I think that there's so much creativity that comes from that, and I have seen some companies lately that are doing some great work to be very inclusive, and I've seen them be more successful because they're inclusive. Because my thing is as well, on the opposite side, if you want to talk the entrepreneurial side of things, is that every single business is selling to these parents, is selling to these caregivers, right? So the more that your staff and your employees are going to be able to speak to that perspective, the better your products are going to be, the better your messaging is going to be. You might find a gap that, hey, this part of our company could be servicing so many caregivers, so many people are caregivers. So I think that it's just more opportunities for people, for companies as well too, to have both stronger employees and to also make their business more successful. So to me, it's almost a no-brainer of like, why don't more people want to learn about this? Because it touches everywhere, and it's such an interesting conversation that I think could really improve everything on every single level.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, even like just trust, I feel like is a huge thing, especially we talk about that employer-employee relationship. And
Right.
myself and my personal experience, some of the best leaders that I've worked for, have been single parents, or they've leveraged experiences that they've had as parents, in leadership. And I think
Right.
that's something that is a skill that's not often translated from parenting. That's what you're doing. You're leading by example in a lot of cases. You're showing kids, how to show up, how to communicate with people. To your point, the amount of time management and other skills that go along with being a parent, or really any type of caregiver, those are incredibly valuable work skills that aren't often acknowledged, and and negative, in some organizations can be viewed at negatively. And so I love that you're really out here advocating, for those, and being able to tie in some of the skill sets that caregivers develop, and actually show why that's actually maybe potentially a level up in the professional world as well.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. I think that it's, like I said, I'm probably passionate about it. It's the average person would probably think I'm being a little crazy, but we're seriously, some of the most amazing people I have worked for and been involved with have been parents, have been caregivers, and just the level of creativity that comes when you're in these high stress situations, I think is something that should be celebrated and should be understood if you have a gap on your resume too. So I'm I'm optimistic that things can get better. I also don't want to be in the camp that everything is negative, everything is terrible, because I have noticed that has been a huge hole
Yeah.
in the current conversation around caregivers, as well as how negative and terrible and distressing everything is, right? So I do want to be the first to say too that I think that there's lots of positive things and lots of happy conversations to be had as well too surrounding caregiving and the ways that we can support people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's two sides to every coin, and so being able to just highlight some of the positives of being able to navigate, really challenging circumstances, I think is extremely valuable. And I know one of the things that you had wanted to share about was, the emotional side of caregiving. Some of the stories that are left untold. How do you work with your clients or businesses to make people feel comfortable and sharing those stories, and what is the
Mhm.
you've seen from that?
Yeah, so I think I have joked several times over that I should have just been a therapist instead, because half the time I don't even have to ask people and they will just start sharing their stories with me and start sharing things that they have been through. So I think some of it is just the way that you connect with people and the way you show up and can be empathetic. But I do think that I have found that so many people carry so many hard things and they want to be able to share them. It's just, again, that kind of weight and that side that they feel like they can't talk about, especially if they carry these negative experiences. Like somebody that I shared with that we'll hopefully be releasing the podcast episode for soon, but she was sharing that she was supporting her mother who was going through cancer at the time, cancer treatment, and was basically on leave from work to be able to take care of her. Mom went back on hospice. She went into remission and was okay, so she went back to work, had to go back on hospice, and work kept telling her, you need to come back, you need to come back. And she said the equivalent of her job that had to be done was like putting a tablecloth on a table. Like that
Mm.
was to her about as important as what her role was, right? And so she ended up finally going back. And the day after she got back, her mom passed away. And that
Wow.
was kind of the biggest sign to her of like, I need to take a break from this, because if this is what corporate means, I'm not sacrificing my family for this. And so she ended up starting her own company and has been very successful doing that, has a bunch of other things she does. And now she still goes back and forth between where she lives in South Carolina And I believe she said her family was up near DC or something, or Maryland, that's where it was. So she literally is flying back constantly to go and take care of her grandparents and where she lives. And so for her to share that negative story and to be like, hey, like I can't do this. I feel like I can't even talk to my friends and family about it because they say these negative things. Just to go to her and say, hey, this work is important. I appreciate you. I think a thank you goes a long way, especially for caregivers that don't hear it that often. So if anything, I feel like I've had people begging to come on and share their stories just because that's how emotionally draining this topic can be. But again, I think it's that combination of just showing that compassion and that empathy for what that person is experiencing, but also being willing to slow down and ask what's going on. Being willing to ask, like, hey, how are, what, you tell me what you need right now. I think that's the biggest thing that really sticks with people as well, too. And 9 times out of 10, they just want someone to listen. They don't even need somebody to come and fix their problems, right? Because I think all too often, if you're the person that has a friend or a family member going through a very high stress, obvious caregiving situation, because obviously we've been talking about the behind the scenes people and the people that maybe you can obviously tell, that something is going on, right? And so if it's an obvious case, or your friend close enough to know something is going on, there is that stress as well too of, okay, well, now I have to come up with something to tell this person. Like if somebody asks, what do you need help with? Then you almost feel like you're the guilty one trying to, okay, they want to help me. Like I need to give them something just so they feel better,
Yeah.
So I think being willing to ask or to say, you do not have to respond to me. You don't have to think like, I'm just going to show up and I'm just going to be here for you. I think that goes a long way because there's so many things that people are carrying that they have never told a single soul because they think that nobody cares and they think that it's not going to be important to them.
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me, and it's very similar again to the work that we do. Obviously, just with people experiencing homelessness, but
Right.
something that I personally struggled with was I didn't know how to ask for help. I used to
Mm-hmm.
feel like it was a burden, and I never wanted to feel like I would be a burden to someone else. So then whatever I was struggling with, I would just end up shouldering myself, and it's like with being a young parent trying to work full time, in a city without any family, there are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
challenges that we faced. And so just kind of being able to have a safe space for at that time, that would have made a huge difference for me. And thankfully now I've matured, I've learned a lot, it's like through that trial and error. And I recognize the strength that asking for help reveals and the power that there is in community. And I think to your point earlier, like showing up, being your authentic self, but creating a safe space for people to feel that way with you. That's something that I certainly had to work on, and I'm really proud of the work that I've done there. And I think by showing up and being vulnerable and being open, I think it encourages others to share with you in that way. And so I'd love for you to kind of elaborate a little bit more on some of the human side of care, and how you've created a safe space where people really want to come and tell their stories, and how you make them feel seen. I think that would be really valuable for our audience to know.
Yeah, for sure. So, um, and I think that some of it is unfortunately a little bit of a intangible or immeasurable thing, right? Like how you can foster these kind of communities. But I really liked what you said about being willing to also show up and show your vulnerabilities and to show things that are going on. Because I even had a friend stop me the other day and say, thank you for telling me when you got sad and things that you're going through. So I think that there is a mutual experience there in the sense of being willing to even open up when you're having these conversations, talking to a coworker about something that's stressing you out, talking to somebody in the line that you notice that looks a little bit lonely if you're at the grocery store waiting to check out, like different situations that you can just stop and talk to people. But I do think that at its core, really just learning to see people for who they are. And I know the other biggest thing that has come up repeatedly with people. One woman told me that she had to just straight up leave all of the different Facebook groups that she was a part of for caregivers because they all got too negative and they all got to just be complaining about the same thing. Somebody would make a post and complain about it, and then everyone would jump on the post and be like, oh, this is terrible. This sucks. Like, I can't, everything is just terrible, horrible, awful. And she said her husband noticed that she was kind of getting very negative, very down on everything, and just wasn't her usual happy self. And so she kind of took a step back and paused and said, you know what, I need to leave these Facebook groups because it's just not jiving with where I'm at in life. I'm already surrounded by negativity. I need to be around something more positive. And so, I think it has to walk this fine balance when you talk about caregiving, when you talk about these experiences where you have to be realistic and you have to talk about the pain and the emotion that's there, but you have to be solution oriented and you have to still bring the light at the end of the tunnel. You have to find ways to support them because at the end of the day, we don't, if you think about some of the happiest people to be around, some of the people that you were just, they're like a magnet that you just line up around them. It's never the people that are complaining nonstop. But
Yeah.
it's the people that see, hey, I know you're going through something hard, but we're going to get through it together. That kind of balance that. So I do think that what I have noticed in how you support people, the stories that people remember, even in fairy tales, even in, the movies that we like watching, the superheroes, it's always that triumph. It's always the way that they overcome the challenges that they go through. And so I think at its core, that's what I'm trying to highlight and show people is that human beings are just amazing. I feel like every time I talk to a caregiver, I'm like, you are an amazing person. I wish I could just talk to you all the time and be your best friend. But it's just seeing that resiliency and seeing how people overcome these things. That's really the side of care that sticks, to see how people make it through some of the darkest moments of their lives and are still able to turn around and take care of somebody else and put their needs above their own.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I don't know, something that struck me when you were sharing was, was my mom has been a caregiver. She also had kids really young,
Mm,
and from the age of like 20 until she was 60, she had a child under the age of 18 in her care. And so like I've been able to learn from her example how she shows up for people. And we have a lot of nurses in the family, so I've seen, nursing can be a very fulfilling and rewarding job, but it can also be a really challenging job. And so, kind of making
mhm,
sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who empathize and understand what you're experiencing, but without kind of contributing to that negative spiral. That
yeah.
is a huge thing. And I saw it looks like Chris Sherrick was in the comments and had said about asking for or accepting help, and how other people get joy out of being able to help you. And
Mm,
for me personally, like that's something that I love, is to be able to help others. That's why I do a lot of the work that I do, because it's very fulfilling for me. And certainly when I'm working with my kids, or I see them succeed at something that they've been struggling with, like that's a great feeling. But when I'm in the shelters every Sunday, or when I'm out on the street, there's a lot of ways that you can show up for people. And I think something that you had said, like just letting people know that you're here for them, whatever that means. Not needing to solve a problem, but just being a safe space where they can just be themselves. If even if it's just a shoulder to
right.
cry on, or just being someone that they can vent to and get it out of their system, knowing that you're there no matter what they need you for, I think is huge. And so I love that that's really a large part of the work that you advocate for.
Yeah, no, I agree with that wholeheartedly because I think, even just in this short time period in the past year or so, I've been through some very challenging situations and have had to support people through some very hard things. And I've gone through hard things myself. And every single time, it's always taught me to just be more grateful for the people that are in my life, the people that stick around and that are always there. And there's something so humbling about being around people when they're in their lowest moments and helping them, overcome that as well. So I think that at its core is what it means to be human, and that's what it means to be a caregiver. And so being able to connect with people in those moments, I don't think there's anything more beautiful than that. And I think that's what people really appreciate and see is it's who sticks around when things start to get messy, right? And when things get hard, whether it's homelessness that you're dealing with, whether it's taking care of a loved one, like it's the people that are there with you through all of it and don't turn an eye away because what you're going through is hard for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. I know some of my closest relationships have been developed through kind of being there for each other through that adversity. And to your point, like the people that are continuing to show up for you and that are going to be there for you, obviously in the good times, but also that they're going to be there to support you when you're struggling. They're going to be there to lift you up when you're down. Like those are really
Right.
the people that you really grow to love and stay connected with and appreciate. And I know I'm extremely grateful for the individuals that I have in my life that have been there and supported me through, some of the challenges that I've been through in the last couple of years. And so you become very grateful, at least I have, for some of those experiences, not only because of the person that it made me become in order to overcome that adversity, but also because of the relationships that I developed, when I was
Mm.
sharing with people and being open, authentic, and vulnerable, and just kind of learning about, who was going to be able to show up for me consistently. That's something that not everyone has an opportunity to really see. And so being able to
Right.
go through those processes and, figuring out who is going to be there, who are my people, that's something that has been really valuable for me.
Right. No, for sure. And I want to say too, the only caveat I will say too is that there's always people that are there for a season, right? And people that are there for that moment. And so I think again, kind of celebrating on the flip side too, people that are just there for a short time to help you
Yeah.
through a specific thing, right, is super important as well too. And so I think that's the other main thing that I've learned too when you want to talk about asking for help or these different experiences is it's going to take a village to be able to do any of these situations, right? Or to be able to help people. It's going to take a village to raise a child, which is typically where they use this, but it's also going to take a village to be able to, help support an elderly person or somebody with any other kind of challenge that they may be facing. So I think that that's kind of the other thing to keep in mind as well too with this conversation or this whole community, right? That community element again, as well as just how many people it's going to take at the end of the day to be able to accomplish all of this and to be able to help people, which again starts with that awareness aspect, which I guess is where all of this comes full circle.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, awareness is obviously key. And yeah, certainly like being grateful for the people that are in your life. I feel like people are there when they're meant to be. And, some people, whether it's different work opportunities, college, different life circumstances, where you're living, like there are people that come and go from your life, but just appreciating them for how they were there for you, I think is really, really important. And having that attitude and being grateful for those experiences, I really love that's some of the work that you advocate for. And I do think I saw a question come up from Cody in the chat about a positive motto or phrase that we can share with people. So I have a couple, but I'd love for you if there's any that you use in your work. One of the
Yeah.
ones that I focus on is kind of empathy over everything. I
Mm.
think if you approach things with an empathetic lens, that's going to lend itself towards a much more positive experience. But I would love if there's any phrases or mottos that you use with the Care Collective that people could reflect on.
Yeah. So I think for sure a big one for me is, or that one kind of quote or sentiment that I really like is if you pretend that somebody is having a bad day every time you interact with them, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be right. So whether that's treating somebody with compassion or forgiveness or whatever it is that they need that day, just give them the benefit of the doubt because who knows what was happening on the flip side of their world, right? So I think that's really important. But I think the other main thing that I try to help people focus on is that self-care side of things and that grace. Right? Grace is probably just the single word that I like to apply to the situation. Is just apply grace in every situation that you can. And I think that giving people that benefit of the doubt, giving yourself that benefit of the doubt will get you a lot further at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, I love that attitude, and there's another phrase where it's like everyone's carrying something that you can't see.
Mm.
So it's like being. That's why for me, like why I focus on empathy, right? It's like you may not understand their situation, how they got in that situation, but instead of approaching with like judgment, if you can approach
Mm.
with curiosity, and
Mhm.
take a genuine interest in this individual, like their experience. That's something that I feel like is really valuable. And particularly whether it's caregivers that you're working with, people don't often get acknowledged in that way. There's not enough people who are taking a genuine interest in what they have experienced, and being there and providing that space for them to share those difficult emotions and feelings. And I think that's why so many people, they end up bottling them up, or they end up avoiding those emotions, and then they seek other outlets that typically, aren't as healthy. I
Right.
certainly years ago would use alcohol as a way to avoid processing things that were going on in my life. And there's any other number of substances or TV or YouTube, whatever it is. There's plenty of ways to distract yourself. And so I think really recognizing, and that first step being awareness, like, hey, there is something I'm struggling with. I do need help, or I could use some support. And then taking that action. So that's another one of my little phrases is action is
Mhm.
the answer. I think once you start taking action consistently, then you can really affect positive change and start to build more positive habits to show up more consistently for yourself and for others.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think your point as well too about everyone having their own things that they turn to that they probably shouldn't, because there's healthy ways to take out what you're going through, and there's unhealthy ways as well. And that has consistently come up with a lot of people that I have talked to as well too. So far as to that one of them was sharing her experience with sobriety and how she's even built a community around that. They're locally in Charleston where I'm at to be able to encourage more people. And the biggest thing I took away from her is that she's like, I did this for myself, number one, but also for other people, for the people I take care of, right? So I can better take care of them. And so I think, kind of circling back to your question earlier as well, too, about that, self-care question, is I think, again, helping people realize that these kind of things are self-care, learning how to cope with the stresses of your everyday life in healthy ways. Like that is self-care just as much
Yeah.
as people want to talk about a bubble bath or whatever else it is, that's kind of the quintessential self-care that people will experience. So I think just learning ways that we can have these kind of conversations and encourage it and tell people, hey, I'm so proud of you for doing that, for taking that step. That's a huge accomplishment for a lot of people. And just learning to celebrate that more vocally, in addition to these vulnerable conversations that we have, to be able to, again, create that full community of support to lift people up where they're at.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And, I love that we kind of getting back to self care. For me, self care became fitness. And
Mhm.
that kind of started my fitness journey. And I just recently finished up my 715-mile bike ride from Sacramento to San Diego to raise money and awareness for people experiencing homelessness on Sunday. And that really started 5 years ago when I made fitness a priority for myself. I wasn't. I looked in the mirror one day and I was the heaviest I'd ever weighed, and I was like, who is this person? Like, this isn't the best version of myself. This isn't the person that I wanted to be when I was a kid. And so that was how I started, was just getting up, going on the Peloton, again, with 3 kids and working full time. I knew if I didn't do it first thing in the morning, there was not going to be another time. My attention would get pulled in different directions and I wouldn't have the energy after I put the kids down at night. So, I started biking, and and then I kind of came up with the ride as an idea to raise awareness for people experiencing homelessness. So we got to pass through 7 out of the 14 cities with the highest number of people experiencing homelessness. Started in Sacramento, made our way to Oakland, then went to San Francisco, San Jose, Los Angeles, Santa Ana, and San Diego. And along the way, like speaking with people in nonprofits, speaking with people in homeless shelters, homeless service organizations, foster care, youth services, all of them are caregivers. And they each had stories where, they were creating a space that they didn't have for themselves when they were younger. And I think that that's really powerful. And, tying it back into caregivers and that message where it's like, if you didn't have something that you need, like, how can you be that for someone else? That there
Right.
are people that need that because you needed it at a time. And so I think, again, openly sharing about that is a great first step, kind of creating that awareness. But I'd love if you could kind of share a little bit about, again, how you can encourage people to be that safe space, and, what's a great first step and then taking that on.
Yeah, so I think that there's many ways for this to look, for this kind of advocacy work. I think that a major step that a lot of people could take is just, at their own comfort level, And obviously at the discretion of, I know you can only share so much information of somebody else's, but what you can share if you are a caregiver is your own experience and your own experiences that you are noticing in other people as well too, right? So whether that's going to look like having a conversation with someone and saying, yeah, this has been really stressful for me, this is a lot that I'm carrying right now, so I think one really important thing is being willing to have those conversations if this is something that you're experiencing, because there is a lot of shame and stigma around it. And I'm not necessarily saying everybody has to go proclaiming, everything they're going through from the rooftops. But I think at your own comfort level, learning to let people in would be able to help people have these conversations more often, right? But I do think on the flip side, that means that if you are somebody that does not know how this feels, learning to practice empathy and, to the point that you brought up earlier, curiosity. I think we are so quick to try to judge the decisions that people are making, whether you think they should be in a nursing home, they shouldn't be in a nursing home, they should have done, hired care in their home to be able to come in and help. There's so many different ways that people can be cared for, and you do not know the specifics of their situation, right? Or what has to happen. So you can't judge whether they decide to use a nanny or whether they go to daycare, or whether somebody decides to be a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home, parent to support someone. So there's just so many different decisions that people can make. And so I think learning to say, okay, this is a reality, this is what they've chosen, this is what's best for them. So I just need to show up now and to be able to support however I can. I think that is one of the most important things that you can kind of say to somebody, again, going back to kind of some of the earlier conversations that we were having, because I do think that there is a lot to be said about some of the reactions that people have told me that they've gotten from people as they discuss things, and it can even be on the flip side to where one woman was telling me about her multi-generational home and the amount of effort, financial effort it even took to be able to build this. And for people to say, oh, you're so lucky that you have that, that's great that your parents just live upstairs and you're downstairs, or, whatever her specific situation was. And she was like, you don't know half of this story. This has actually been so challenging. I do not get a break from them. Like, there's cultural aspects as well to her story as well. That was interesting because she's a minority in her area, in her experience as well too. So she was sharing some, issues that she'd kind of encountered there. But needless to say that she would often be told, oh, your situation should be easy. I'm jealous of your situation. When on the inside, she is feeling nothing but the difficulty and the weight of all of it, right? So I think, again, it's learning that before you assume anything, good or bad, that you're just going to go based off of their reaction. Ask questions like, how does this make you feel? Or what are you thinking about right now? Before you start projecting, your gut reaction onto somebody else. I think that can be one of the most important questions that you ask to be able to then assess, okay, can I bring them a meal? Can I, step in and offer some respite care? Maybe you're gonna sit with their dad on a Tuesday morning so that they can step out and go get, a drink for themselves and go to get a coffee that morning or something, whatever it is that works for them. So I think, step number one is just asking and being there before you can then offer that help on the back end.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned projecting. I think that that's something that is so extremely common that so many people are doing, potentially like unknowingly. And they'll, and I think it goes again with that judgment, right? Like where you're putting yourself, your experiences, and you're projecting that onto others, and then judging them for however they're dealing with the situation. So I think that that's certainly something that more people can be aware of. And again, I think if you kind of have more of that inquisitive mindset where you're, instead of going in with a judgmental lens, you're actually inquisitive and you're asking genuine questions about the situation, about how you can show up. That's especially with people experiencing homelessness, like in the work that I've done, that's really important. Not judging people for being in this situation, trying to actually understand them, their journey there. And you can address a lot of misconceptions that you have about things when you do that. Because to your point earlier, everyone has a story, everyone has challenges, circumstances that they've had to overcome. And so, again, not choosing to punish them for their decisions or judge them for decisions that they've made that maybe you disagree with, but seeking to understand, why they made that decision or how they're going to make a better decision next time and how you can support them in whatever challenging circumstance they're going through right now, I think makes a huge deal.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think that you bring up a good point as well too, that, you know, even in the negative experiences too, even if somebody makes a mistake, it doesn't matter at the end of the day too, because I know that I've done that plenty. Like,
Yeah.
my life is full of mistakes that I wish I hadn't made, but because I had people there to pull me back out of that and to, sit there with me, that's the only reason why I was able to get anywhere.
Yeah, and I think again, just it kind of goes back to being empathetic, right? And just recognizing that we've all made mistakes. We're human beings. We're going to continue to make mistakes. So showing up for yourself with grace, that was another thing that I really loved about what you said, and that can often be, very challenging for people to do.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think that that is I even joke with people that my middle name is Grace, and I think it's because I needed that reminder for myself all the time. But I think that that is the biggest thing that I have learned over and over, and that I've seen in other people, is that side of grace is just the biggest challenge that I think a lot of people struggle with as well too. Being able to connect with people, being able to see that they just need to be forgiven. They need to just be allowed to have a bad day. I think that there's a lot of different ways that giving people grace can kind of show up in the conversations as well.
Yeah, 1,000%. And thank you, Cody. I appreciate it. Yeah, it was a really exciting finish to the Pedal for Progress, and something about like giving myself grace. I was really worried the last night that I wasn't going to be able to finish. I started to get like full body shakes and had a
Mm.
fever, and couldn't really sleep that last night before. So just kind of like I had a moment with myself where I was like, I've made it this far. It's been an incredible journey. I'm going to give it my best effort tomorrow, and whatever happens, happens. And so I kind of just let myself process whatever I was feeling. Thankfully, I was able to get some hydration and feel a little better, and finish the last day strong. But that's something that, if I didn't give myself that grace the night before, that could have lingered on. And I see a question there from David. How do you show self-grace? And I'd love to get your perspective on this as well, Mikayla. For me, I think it's just being empathetic and like understanding that, I am human. There's only so much that I can do. And working to love yourself, despite your mistakes, for your mistakes, and just love all of you. I think for me, that's how I would consider like giving myself grace, is just appreciating, knowing that I'm doing the best that I can. Some days are going to be more challenging than others. Some days you're going to make more mistakes than others. But as long as you keep showing up and you keep trying your best, for me, like that gives me solace that I'm doing the best that I can. But I'd love, Mikayla, if there's anything from your expertise that you can answer that question.
Yeah, well, I can share some from my therapist expertise, because this is something that I've had to work on a lot. And, and me kind of practicing that vulnerability and talking about these kind of conversations, because I think that grace and that self-compassion has been something I struggle with for a lot. And so if you want kind of a more practical thing that you can do beyond just, kind of the mentality or the mindset of, which I think is great what you shared, of how that kind of works and operates. Something that I literally had to sit down and do was just think about, experiences, qualities that I liked in myself, or, traits that I noticed in myself, to be able to remind me on bad days, why I still care about myself and why I need to be able to put myself first, And it can be difficult, especially if you're in a very low place in your life, to be able to think about the things that you can appreciate about yourself. So sometimes this activity can even come in the form of being able to ask other people that surround you, what are good qualities in myself? What are good things that you notice about me? And I hope that you have people in your life that are willing to do that for you and that can do that for you. Because I know that has been vital in my healing process, is being able to surround me by people that are willing to see through my flaws and remind me of the good things, when I need that reminder to be graceful to myself. But I do think at its core, the more that I worked on doing those things, writing those things down, literally looking at it, putting it by my mirror where I would get ready in the morning. It gets easier to kind of internalize those things so that when you are going through a bad day, you'll remind yourself, oh, well, it doesn't matter because I know that I'm, you know, stable in my relationships. I know that I'm a good person, that I love people. You know, whatever good qualities it is that, you know, you can list about yourself, I feel like that is the kind of steam that I can get behind, you know, being able to apply it in a more practical way day to day, to be able to remind myself to have this grace for myself, because I think it's really easy to kind of keep a tally, you know, of here's things I've done right, here's things I've done wrong, but that's not the way that life works. You know, your worth and the things that you go through, that never changes. So the scale of having grace for yourself should never change depending on what you have gone through. It should be constant, right? Because your worth is constant. That never changes. That light that you see in somebody else that inspires you to care for them, you should be able to see that for yourself too. You know, and I'm sure you see that a lot in working with people that are homeless as well too. That it's that person is still there. That's just something they're experiencing passively, right? That's just something
Yeah.
that they're going through. So if you apply that to yourself too, like anything that you're going through, you know, that's just something you're experiencing, right? So you have to separate yourself from that, to be able to actively show yourself more grace.
Yeah, and I think like you mentioned like a gratitude practice, kind of where something that I have done at different points where if I was struggling, just writing down things that you like about yourself, and then to your point, leaning on your community, right? Leaning on those loved ones when if you're having a really dark day and you can't find anything positive, reach out to the people, and that's where that strength comes in to lean on your community. And I think that having that daily practice of gratitude where it's just you wake up and you write down two or three things that you're thankful for that day. Whether it's just waking up, having your health. Like when you start to look for the positives, you'll find so many more. And to your earlier point, like the same goes for when you look at the negatives, right? There's positive and negative in everything in life, and so what you focus on is what you're going to see. So
Mhm.
when you're having things or you feel like things aren't going your way, being able to spin it back around and be grateful for some of the things that you've gone through, and then also recognize the strength that overcoming adversity brings. That's a philosophy that I've shared with on multiple different platforms, but it's the story of the Chinese farmer by Alan Watts. Are you familiar with that, Mikayla?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
I'll give you a brief rundown. But essentially, there's a farmer and he's out working in a field one day, and his horse runs away. And
Mm.
the villagers all come over and like, oh, what a terrible tragedy! Your farm now doesn't have a horse. How are you going to plow the fields? And the farmer's like, yeah, well, maybe. The next day, the horse comes back. It brings with it 5 wild horses. Again, all the villagers, the neighbors come over, like, oh, what a great fortune! Have 6 horses for your family. This is such a great blessing for your farm. Again, the farmer responds, maybe. The day after that, his son is out trying to break one of these wild horses. He falls off and he breaks his back. The villagers come over, oh, what a terrible tragedy. What's your son is back? How is he going to recover? Again, the farmer responds, maybe. The following day, the Chinese army comes around to conscript soldiers. They pass on his son due to his broken back. Again, the villagers come over, oh, what a great blessing. Your son doesn't have to go to the army. Again, the farmer responds, maybe. So the whole point is we never really know the consequences of good fortune, nor do we know the consequences of misfortune. So it's like if
Mm.
you can find a way to stay in the moment, there's some of maybe it seemed like the worst thing that happened to you in your life could turn out to be the best thing in your life, in retrospect, and vice versa. Something that
Mm.
seems like a blessing could turn out to be something that actually was very damaging. So just kind of helping you to stay present and focus on controlling what you can in the moment. That's something that I reflect on often.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea, and I think that there is so much to say about your perspective and the things that you focus on, and I really do think how you speak to yourself and what goes on in your brain is where your whole outlook on life starts, and that's what drives your decisions. That's what drives everything else that's in your life, right? So the more you can work on that mentality and what's going on in your head, the more that's going to help you in everything else that comes after the fact, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then in closing, if there is anybody out there that would like to get in touch with you and work with the Care Collective, how can they do that? How can they support your work?
Yeah, so you can go to our website. It's carecollectivepod.com. You can also follow along on our Instagram. That's kind of the best way to get in touch with us. We are actively looking for people to share their stories. So if you know of anybody or if you have a story, honestly, you've heard all the different stories that I've shared so far. There's probably lots of different people that can share. And on Instagram, that is carecollective.podcast is our username. Once again, that's carecollective.podcast. And feel free to shoot me a DM there. I am the one that manages it still. So I'm always happy to answer questions and share more about what's coming, or again, always looking for podcast guests. So feel free to reach out if you have a story that you would like to share with others.
Well, I love that. And then we're also working on a really exciting collaboration. So if you want to support both Cherry, Willow, and Mikayla's work at the Care Collective, we have a shirt that we're going to be getting up in the shop here in the next couple of days. So really excited about that. And then if you want to learn more about Cherry Willow, our work, how we partner with nonprofits or aligned businesses, please feel free to reach out to myself directly, Matt at cherrywillowapparel.com, or you can contact us through our website, or you can also contact Shauna, which is Shauna at cherrywillowapparel.com. And there's a lot of ways that you can get involved in, not only taking care of caregivers or taking care of people experiencing homelessness, but whatever cause resonates with you, whatever you're passionate about, be an advocate for that. And using apparel is a great way to spread that message in the community and potentially help other people in the community get involved supporting that cause. There's no better way for people to learn about it than by seeing you wearing an apparel for an organization that you're passionate about supporting, and you telling the story of why you're passionate about that. So that's the gist of Cherry Willow and the work that we're doing. And stay tuned for more about the Pedal for Progress ride. Really excited to work on the documentary now and be able to bring that to you all here in the coming months. And so again, thank you so much for tuning in. It was a really great conversation. Thank you so much, Mikayla, for sharing all the work that you're doing at the Care Collective, and appreciate everyone for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.